Today, we're going to be speaking for the first time to Democratic Congressman Jimmy Gomez, who represents California's 34th Congressional District. This includes much of downtown LA and also East LA. So good to have you on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
You know, I want to talk a little bit about this totally arbitrary goal that I can't say Donald Trump set, but maybe it was Stephen Miller of
Yeah.
3,000 deportations a day that's going on. You
Uh,
know, one of the incredible things that's happening is I don't judge a policy by how many people you can deport, but objectively, the number of deportations is about half of that of which we saw under President Obama. And
yeah.
to me, this shows sort of the mathematical bankruptcy of the idea that we're targeting individuals who have committed violent crimes. We're doing all these things. We know the administration has gone way beyond that, and still they're not making this self-imposed standard of 3,000
Yeah.
a day. What does that mean to you when you see that this is just completely flopping?
Well, it means that they don't really care about results. They just care about the show. They care about what it looks like, and that's why you see just an over militarization of the of ICE enforcement. I've talked to people who have been in this field for years, and they say they never see ICE officials wearing the kind of equipment, wearing the kind of fatigues and the military vehicles. They never see that before. So all of this is for show, to kind of like scare people, to intimidate people, to tell Trump's base that he's being tough. And I think Stephen Miller really does want to deport 3,000 a day, but because of that goal, they're just being even more reckless, and that's why you're seeing them just target people based on the color of their skin, the language they speak, or where they work. And I've been saying that for a while because it's obvious. There's over 500,000 undocumented Canadians and Europeans in the United States, but you never see a raid targeting them. You never see them just randomly pulling over some white person. And I think it's because they don't care. They're just trying to meet this goal, and they're also leaving us vulnerable when it comes to the drug cartels, when it comes to human trafficking at the border, all of that, because they're pulling people off to do this work that is not to target people that most of them don't have any criminal records. So, and it's highly expensive. Let me tell you one operation. When they went to a swap meet, they had, I don't know, anywhere from 50 to 100 people in full gear. They raided that swap meet. They pulled out two people.
Mm.
This thing, my guess that this thing is costing anywhere from 80 to $100,000 per person that they detain.
I want to
That,
talk about the racial component because, like you said, you've asserted that there's definitely a targeting based on skin color here.
yeah,
There's this interesting thing where I'm a Hispanic immigrant from Argentina, right? But I'm
yeah,
white, and I moved here early enough where I speak English without an accent.
yeah,
I've talked to a lot of people who said, you know, David, even though on paper, especially as someone who strongly speaks out against this administration, on paper I should be worried. But because of the way I look and the way I sound, I'm probably not going to be a priority, is the reality. So can you talk a little bit more
yeah,
about the racialized component here?
yeah. No, it's yeah, you're definitely right, David. I didn't know you're Argentinian until I read your bio. So it's something that we know what's going on. They're targeting our communities, and they're targeting individuals that live in Latino communities. They're going. That's why you've seen them arresting U.S. citizens. You've seen footage over and over where they're saying, "I'm a citizen," and then they have to prove it. Just the other day, they targeted somebody in Norma Torres's district. They beat him. They literally he ran, which he never should have done. They beat him up, and then he said, I needed a doctor, and he said I was a citizen, and they dumped him off a few streets away, right? This is like, so they're obviously targeting people that look like me, that look like the people in my community, and it is based on race, no matter what people say. And what I always repeat is, like, I don't know of any MS-13 gang members working day jobs as a day laborer.
Mm.
It's just ridiculous. So no matter, and even Tom Holman even said they do it on appearance. So I think that we're going to have to keep pushing it, because what happens if their numbers drop? Who do they go after next? That's the question I want people to think about. Who do they go after next?
The visits to the detention facilities, I want to talk about a little bit because we've heard a lot about
Okay.
conditions in different places. There's kind of two categories. There's the facilities where members of Congress are being allowed in, and then there's the situations where members of Congress are being turned away. Let's talk about the second part first. When
Yeah.
you and your colleagues are being turned away, who turns you away and what do they say? Do they say, oh, if you don't have an appointment or something, you can't come in? Or like, what's the
Oh,
justification for saying no?
yeah. Well, I started going to visit the facilities. I've been to them before all of this happened.
Yep.
But I went to this facility in downtown LA and like a day after the massive protest. But I went early in the morning with to make sure that there was no one there. And that day they turned me away because they basically weren't cleared. Later in the day, they basically said in a press release that there was 1,000 protesters outside and it was a dangerous situation. So that's why the members of Congress turned away. Well,
Huh.
there was only reporters, my staff, and a lot of attorney. That was it. It was about 20 people, but no 1,000 person. So it's like, so that was one lie. And then we went back and they said, you know what? It's not safe for you inside. I kind of laughed. I'm like, because the people that were telling me this were the folks who, they're just the government affairs people. They're not they're not, they don't have any equipment. They're dressed in plain clothes. They don't have any like weapons or anything. And they're telling me it's not safe inside for me. I said, well, first, if it's not safe inside for me, it's not safe inside for you.
That's right.
And also, if it's not safe inside, then it's not safe for the people that you're detaining. So they're kind of like, they're like, well, we're not making the decisions. We're not running this facility. Then the third time, which was like the I would say the most insulting thing, when I went back, they said it was because and we talked to somebody in DC this time, and they said it's because this is not a detention facility, even though it says Metropolitan Detention Center, Bureau of Federal Prisons. This is a field office. And then they said it's a processing center. And I said, well, if they're not, I said, the law says and I read it, any facility that's detaining individuals, I get to go inside. And they're all, well, this is processing. I said, so are they free to leave? Right. So whatever, like, so they're just twisting themselves all into knots to basically not allow us to go in. And
Yep.
that's because I think these processing centers or field offices, as they're calling them, are really where the most egregious overcrowding is, where people have to sleep on the floor. I think you saw one that's very similar in the New York Times. They did a video, and that was very similar to the one I'm going in. And those are only supposed to hold people up to 12 hours, up to 100 people sitting. So if people are staying there longer, then there's nowhere to lay down. There's not enough food. They can't get access to medicine. So this is why I think they're not letting us in, is because the most egregious stuff is happening in these facilities. And they're also, this is where they kind of put pressure on them to sign expedited release forms, which that means that if they agree, that they can be deported almost within 24 hours. So that's why I think they're keeping us from there. But those are the worst case scenarios.
Now, in terms of the places you have been able to get into, what have you observed?
Well, I haven't been in any of them recently.
Oh, they haven't.
'Cause I've
So
been
you haven't
focusing.
succeeded at getting into any of them.
No,
Okay.
and then and then we had to make an appointment. They said, hey, make an appointment with a week's 3 days notice. Then it became a week's. We make the appointments, and then they cancel them either the day before or the day of. So they don't want us to see these facilities. My colleagues have been in these other facilities, and one of the things that they notice, especially here in California and Adelanto, is that a lot of the people there are not from California. So what they tend to do is when they detain somebody and they put them in a detention center, they send them away from where they're actually living and staying. And I
Ah,
believe it's to keep them away from their attorneys, from their friends and families, their loved ones, so nobody can go and see them easily. And I think it's just a deliberate. And so people kind of see that. My roommate Darren Soto went to go to the alligator Alcatraz, which he said it was a joke, right? That they just came up with this idea. It's like some of the men are crowded into one cells, but then the whole thing is not even empty. It's a boondoggle for whoever's getting the contract. $500 million for this facility with no water hookups, no electricity hookups. It's just not built. You could have built something permanent for 250 million next
right.
to the one that exists. So all of this for them is a show, so they can put it up on social media and feed it to their base. So, but here's the thing: people shouldn't be treated as props in their show. They have certain rights, and they should be respected for those rights, even if they're quote unquote not citizens.
I want to zoom out a little bit, and I was looking forward to talking to you because I know you're a straight shooter on a lot of this stuff. I'm very concerned about the next 2 to 4 years for the Democratic Party, and I'll tell you why. Over the last 3 months, I've had, a dozen senators on, a dozen of your colleagues from the House, half a dozen governors. Everybody's very nice. Everybody has principles that mostly overlap with mine, all of that. But when it really gets down to it, even on some of the stuff like where I ask pretty straightforward questions about housing or tax rates or whatever, and sometimes the answers are a little bit shaky and I push back a little bit. I'm not seeing that there is really an appetite right now for seriously examining sort of like what is the policy platform, and importantly, what is the coherent message looking to 2026 that goes beyond? I mean, listen, the immigration policy of this administration is a
Yeah,
disaster. The on and off tariffs calculated, we don't even know how, are a complete and total disaster.
yeah,
The anti-war president who bombs Iran, right? On every aspect, like it's all bad. There's no question
yeah,
about it. But then when we kind of get into it, I'm not necessarily getting, and my audience feels that they are definitely not getting, what seems like a Democratic Party that is really ready to say, here's why you vote for us, beyond just like superficial talking points. And I'll give you
yeah.
one other data point that concerns me.
Uh,
This DNC autopsy on 2024 that is reportedly not considering whether part of the problem was Biden running for reelection to begin with, which to me seems like the issue. I
uh,
think Joe Biden was a good president,
uh,
but I think the mistake was running for reelection. How do you do an autopsy without considering that? I know I'm saying a lot, but this is like the
uh,
40,000
uh,
foot view of like,
yeah,
man, what are we up against next year? What's
yeah.
your take?
Well, I think people. You're absolutely right. People have to be honest when it comes to losses, and losses are also most of the time where people really do self reflection. But as a whole, people don't like to do that. But that's what we have to do, and I believe the reason why we failed across the country is that we did lose touch with why people are pissed off. Right? I've been
Mm,
dealing with that in my district for a number of years, and it's not because in a Dem R seat. I'm in a Democratic seat with hardly any Republicans. So when I'm running against another D, what I realize is there's no ideological anchor to say, hey, this guy's good, this guy's bad. So you really have to get into the weeds with people. Why are they so pissed off? And what it is one, they do feel like the system is rigged, right? That they work really hard to try to get ahead, to go to school. Then they're saddled with debt. Then they would try to buy a house. Shit's too expensive,
right.
right? So like they're pissed off, and they're rightly pissed off because they feel like they got the short end of the stick for nothing that they've done. And Democrats are just saying, especially in the last election, and I had this argument with my colleagues. They were saying, "Oh, things are great. These economic indicators are moving in the right direction." Well, all that bullshit, nobody cared because I noticed it. Right, being a dad, being on a budget, I saw the prices go up, up, and up, and our savings started dropping, dropping, dropping. Right, you start overspending here and there, and that's what a lot of Americans felt. And so we're not addressing that primary frustration, and then people start automatically think, oh, it's because you guys are in the pockets of corporations or the pockets of the status quo. So it's like, no, fuck the status quo. I'll do whatever it takes to fight for my district. So I think that's where people like didn't really lean into the fact that people were hurting. I always tell people you have to focus on what people are telling you, right? So I like cost of living, buying a house, raising a family, and then taking on the establishment. Now it's Donald Trump and the billionaires, but taking on whoever the establishment way of thinking on how you fix problems to get it done. Right. And that's all that people want. They want you to fight. They want you to understand what they're going through. So this administration, to one, for this like elected officials to not really understand why they lost is a big problem. And then not to self-reflect as a party of the DNC, that's a big problem because you're not going to fix that. One of the things I always tell people is that he, what's his name, Pat Ryan and Chris Deluzio, we all three ran on the same messaging: lower the cost of living. For me, it was housing and basically childcare. and taking on the establishment to do it. What did they run? Lowering the cost of living, taking on the establishment to do it. And because people think that once we get there, we sell out. So we have to really kind of tackle that. But we do need big ideas, right? We need to, like, the housing affordability problem is one of the number one ideas. What's his name? Fucking Tucker Carlson. He was at Turning Point USA. What was he talking about?
Yep.
Housing, right? If we don't move in a big way to deal with that problem, they will, and they're going to win those voters.
Yeah, there's, I was reflecting back on President Obama's reelection campaign. If we just looked at economic metrics, things were looking pretty good at the end of Barack Obama's first term. And if we only looked at economic metrics, things were also looking pretty good at the macro level during Joe Biden's term. But one of the key differences, I think, is that when Mitt Romney was trying to go after Obama on economic issues, Obama didn't just go, everything's awesome. Because if he did, it would have come off as tone deaf. And so what Barack Obama did was sort of cite the accomplishments, but say, we've got a lot more work to do here. I think Mitt Romney would do it the wrong way. I have the better ideas. And I think that there was more of an acknowledgement that it wasn't working for everybody, that made people think, oh, I do want to vote to reelect Barack Obama, where maybe with Biden-Harris, that recognition wasn't there.
Yeah, correct. And here's another thing, and I think it's kind of like along the lines of what you just kind of made me think about. The reason why it's so important on how Democrats act now, that we're willing to, to throw down, to go after the Epstein files, to go after Donald Trump and Signalgate and fucking Whiskey Pete, really hit them over and over and over. The reason why that matters is because if we don't do it now, they think that we're going to be passive if we get back into power, right? They want to see us fight as an indicator of what we will do if we get power back. Right. And that's the thing. If we get power back and then try to do things the old way when Donald Trump's president, well, shit, then the old problem is will continue to fester. Everything from housing affordability to childcare to the climate change to everything is still going to fester. So it's like, in order to kind of break that, you need to show people when you're out of power, which is the hardest, is that you know how to fucking fight when you're out of power. That means, like, when you see these opportunities, you keep hitting them and you keep hitting them and you keep hitting them. One thing is, like, I tell people, if Donald Trump's theme is attack, 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 ours has to be 10 times more, right? Stop playing by the old rules. So it's kind of the same thing. When it comes to policy, what are you willing to do to actually fix the problems that Americans are facing? And so they're connected. But we have to know where people are at. Like, if you don't know that people are struggling and you keep on talking about, oh, the fucking inflation rate's down, but the prices haven't come down, then you're out of touch and people are not going to vote for you.
All right. I hope your colleagues will listen to you over these next 14, 15 months. We've been speaking with Congressman Jimmy Gomez, who represents California's 34th Congressional District. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.